Yes, enough of that already. Jolly good. Thank you for joining myself, His Eminence, the Field Marshal, once again to deal with the fuckery on the interwebs. Joined, of course, as usual, by my constant confidant and offsider, Lord Edward Yellow, who's also a Field Marshal and Commander-in-Chief of the Meat Militia, and a very, very naughty boy, aren't you, Ted? Very naughty indeed.
Bollocks!
One of these days I'm going to stop asking Ted, because he just doesn't, there's no learning curve on the boy at all, frankly. Yes, anyway, Ted has recently decided that he is going to identify as a giant in the entertainment and educational communities, and as such, his pronouns from here on in will be fee, fi, and fo fum. Woe betide anyone who forgets to use his appropriate pronouns. You will be dealt with in a severe fashion should you fail to do so. Right, let's move on with this fuckery here. It's a channel called Zoe, apparently, and we've got a couple of cocksplats who think themselves to be awfully intelligent and clever, talking about things that clearly they actually don't have the first fucking clue about. One of them is a professor. Apparently it's not that hard to do. Anyway, that's for another day. Let's hear about what Zoe has to say about This is what the keto diet does to your body, by Professor Christopher Gardner. Well, Professor Christopher Gardner, let's hear all about your ideology. That'll be fun.
Welcome to Zoe, Science and Nutrition, where world-leading scientists explain how their research can improve your health. Ketogenic diets ignite furious...
Okay, who's already got the idea? Fuck me, really? Seriously? Go on there, son.
...debate. Keto has been promoted as a magic bullet for weight loss by its supporters and slammed as dangerous by its opponents. It's no surprise. Completely removing almost all carbohydrates is not what most people consider a balanced diet.
So what? Who's to say that a balanced diet is nutritionally appropriate, indicated, or what a human being should do? In fact, we shouldn't, because balance is, in dietary circles, is actually the best bit of propaganda I've seen. You take a word that's associated universally with goodness, light, justice, everything that we should aspire to, and you apply it to nutrition. Of course we should have a balanced diet. Of course we should. That's a good thing. Let's all make sure our diets are balanced and tell our kids from the time they can even understand what the word means that they should eat a balanced diet, and repeat it so many times that nobody seriously questions it. Except there's only one problem with it. What is that problem with it, Ted, exactly?
Bollocks!
That's right, it is. Human beings are a specialist animal. We have evolved in a specialist niche like every other animal extant on the planet. We have a nutritional approach which is ideal for our bodies, and it's not balanced. Anyway, let's move on with this nonsense.
With carbs off the table on keto, we still need to find our energy somewhere. This means a dramatic increase in fat intake.
Well, you might also take an approach where you quite markedly increase your protein intake. Now, for some people, that's a good idea because there is that sector of society that is intaking insufficient protein. But if you get to a point where you're taking in more protein than you require, then that can be problematic. But yes, in general, someone on a sensible ketogenic diet will need to intake most of their energy in the form of fats. Hopefully they'll choose the right kind of fats, the kind that won't cause them a health problem, those kind being animal fats. What's next?
At the same time, drastically reducing carbs means starving our gut microbes of the fiber that feeds them.
Only if you have a gut microbiota which is speciated towards and leaning towards an expectation of carbohydrate intake, precisely because maybe as an individual you've been eating a diet rich in carbohydrates hitherto, but once you've adapted to a carnivorous diet, what you'll find is those bacteria who wanted the carbs and didn't get them will die off, and they'll be replaced by other speciations and balances of speciations that are peaceable and health promoting, of microbiota that enjoy the meat-based environment. So that's not a problem either. What's next?
Nonetheless, doctors prescribe keto diets to
Some do, some don't. And doctors have no business prescribing diet whatsoever. They're not trained in diet. They're trained in allopathic medicine.
treat people with severe diabetes and see dramatic improvements. And many healthy people swear by keto for weight loss. On top of this, removing carbohydrates prevents blood sugar spikes and
Just enjoying a bit of 100% pure meat juice this afternoon, it being a Saturday afternoon where I would normally be off playing sport. Cancelled today due to rain for the third time in 6 weeks. It's a bit depressing, really. So anyway, meat juice, 100% meat juice and nothing else is what's in here. Squeezed from freshly squeezed cows. Meat juice. Right, carry on.
crashes linked to inflammation and disease. On today's show, we want to ask what the latest science says.
The latest science, good.
Are keto diets a crazy fad, or could keto be right for me?
Well, as a species, human beings, Homo sapiens sapiens, we've been consuming a ketogenic dietary pattern for, probably 4.5 million years in speciations of animals leading up to humans that weren't quite yet humans. It's thought that human beings in our current form have existed on the planet for about 350,000 of those 4.5 million. And during that stage, right up until about 10,000 years ago, we have absolutely consumed a ketogenic diet. So there's nothing crazy or fad about it. That's the way our genes are evolved. That's the way we've got our nutrition for many, many moons. And that's how we should continue to do it. I mean, 10,000 years is a flash in the pan in evolutionary terms. So we are still absolutely evolved completely for meat juice.
To help answer this question, I'm joined by leading nutritional researcher, Christopher Gardner.
By the way, Christopher's going to say all sorts of things nonsensical and otherwise, mostly nonsensical, about the causes of all sorts of disease processes. What I would like to say up front is that the cause of every serious life-shortening disease is not hitting the like button on my videos and subscribing to all of my YouTube channels, all of which are listed underneath this one in the show notes. There's about 5 or 6 of them. They're all brilliant. You should subscribe to every single one. Otherwise, you'll suffer metabolic consequences, basically. Shall we move on? Christopher, Professor Christopher. Wow.
A professor at Stanford University, a member of Zoe's Scientific Advisory Board. Christopher is excited to share the results of his landmark clinical trial of keto diets.
Landmark clinical trial. This will be interesting.
Published this week in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition.
Not sure when this video was published or when that particular paper was published either, but we'll have a look at it if we need to at some point. I'm just here to drink some meat juice with you all boys and girls on a Saturday afternoon, my time, and to enjoy your company and just react off the cuff to what I'm hearing. So we won't be necessarily doing a great deal of scientific incisive views into things today. We'll leave that up to Ted perhaps during the week.
What, are you retarded?
I don't know why I keep him on. I really don't. I need a new offsider. Anybody keen? I would suggest almost anybody would be better than Ted, frankly.
Bollocks!
See what I mean?
You will find links to this paper in our show notes. Christopher, it's always such a pleasure to spend time with you. And I'd like to start with our regular quick fire round of questioners that our listeners are sort of used to now.
Excellent.
So let's kick off. Can you improve your health on a ketogenic diet?
Yes, it is possible if you do it right. There you go. That was a quick answer. This guy's going to come up with something a lot less quick.
That's complicated because
It's complicated.
there's good and bad ketogenic diets,
Sure,
and there's
of course.
good and bad normal diets. I can imagine a ketogenic diet that's healthier than some people's regular diet if you followed it a certain way. So we'll have to come back to that.
All right, so it's complicated. Can you lose weight on a keto diet?
Yes.
Absolutely. It's a very restrictive diet.
No, it isn't. Not at all. It's not restrictive. It's freeing. It's energizing. It's health promoting. It's indicated for humans, all humans, at all times. Not limiting it. I'll tell you what's limiting or restricted. Living a life of compromised health status and dying too soon because of all sorts of disease processes, which are all caused by not hitting the like button on my videos and subscribing to all my channels.
And for the things that are still allowed, the palatability will run out quick and you'll say, I am hungry.
Nonsense, absolute nonsense. There's a vast array of different not plant-based, goodness me. There is a vast array of animal products that we can consume on a daily basis that are satisfying and titillating to the palate, and it's just nonsense to say that it runs out of appeal. It doesn't. Also, the reason that we eat is in order that we might live. It is not the other way around. And frankly, if your only source of titillation, enjoyment, and fun in your life is food, I suggest you rethink your life. Probably start by hitting the like button. Right, what's next?
Hungry, but not for that. So nope, not going to eat, lowered my calories, lost weight.
Is keto a good diet for most people?
Yes,
I'm personally opposed to it
because you're an idiot, clearly.
because of its absence of grains and fruits
Well, you don't need grains or fruits
and beans.
or beans in your diet. There is absolutely no requirement for grains, fruits, or beans in the human diet. So right away, within a minute of this guy starting to talk, he's done. He's finished. He's an idiot. He's a complete cocksplat. No idea what he's talking about whatsoever. Professor of what are you a professor of? I don't know.
Which don't seem justified to me. So I don't think in the long run that it is. It's cool.
So your opinion, right? You have an opinion. You don't think it's justified to eliminate things that we don't need from our diet. Well, it is justified, Christopher, because of the problematic nature of those things to us. Those things cause a problem for our health. Nearly as bad as the problems that will be caused to your health if you don't subscribe to all my channels and hit the like button.
Great for getting rid of added sugar and refined grains.
Is doing keto from time to time helpful?
You shouldn't do it from time to time. It's a lifestyle. It's an approach to nutrition that's indicated. It's what you ought to do. Anything that you switch in and out of from time to time is not likely to be necessarily a good thing. It could cause problems of all of its own. Like when you change your diet around all the time, that'll mess up your microbiome, for example.
I'm opposed to anything that isn't a diet pattern that you'll follow for life. I'm opposed to things that are just transient. I'm going to do this for a while, and it's a diet that I'm going on, and then I will go off the diet when I got where I wanted to be. Well, if you go off it, then the other stuff comes back, and it was useless.
What's the biggest misconception about the ketogenic diet?
That it's high meat. People think it's low carb, and what has low carbs? Oh, well, meats have low carbs, but really the ketogenic diet is a high fat diet.
If it's properly planned and executed, yes.
If you end up eating a lot of protein, then
Well, not a lot. It's moderate.
you've met your needs for the day and you convert your proteins into carbs and fats, and whoop, you threw yourself out of ketosis.
Yeah, but the goal of a ketogenic diet is not to be in ketosis. That's just the name of it, because that's one of the ramifications of it, is that at various times, and for most of the time actually, you will be in ketosis. But a properly planned, properly executed ketogenic diet will absolutely kick you out of ketosis every single time you have a meal if you're doing it properly. And that's what's supposed to happen. That's the design. Mr. Fruits and whole grains and beans.
By making carbs out of your protein.
That's amazing, and I did not know that.
That's not amazing. And how can you host a show like this and not know of the most basic fundamental tenet really of human nutrition, which is gluconeogenesis exists? Wow.
Thank you, Chris. Final question. Will cutting out carbs stop your body's ability to process them?
No.
No.
That was simple.
Good, he got one right and straight away and with the right answer. Awesome.
All right. Well, look, I'm really looking forward to digging into those answers more. The whole topic of ketogenic diets ignites furious discussion and I think a lot of confusion. I personally have never tried it because the idea of giving up bread and croissant for good, I just know that's a step too far.
Oh, God, what a pretentious wanker. Sorry, but that's just my opinion.
But as someone with bad blood sugar control, I know there's some impressive evidence that keto can help people with diabetes come off insulin. So there's some real clinical evidence to suggest there's something interesting there. And so I think really fascinating, Christopher, for you to take us through this. And maybe we could just start with what is a ketogenic diet and how does it work?
Sure. So the ketogenic diet actually goes back 50 years as...
No, in fact, 4.5 million. Quite a few more than about 50. I mean, straight away. Wrong. No.
Is a diet that was used to treat epileptic seizures.
That's when it first came back into the consciousness of humans, it having been removed from their consciousness by about 10,000 years following the agricultural revolution, which was the second worst thing that human beings ever did in terms of altering their diets ever in our history as a species. The worst, of course, was to add industrialized seed oils to our diet and remove perfectly natural, largely saturated animal fats.
It's been around for a really, really long time, but it's...
Yes, 4.5 million years, much longer than 50. A lot longer than 50.
really odd that people are now taking this and doing it for weight loss and some...
Why is it odd that people are doing the species-appropriate, species-specific diet for weight loss? Why would it be odd to expect that if you follow an appropriate diet for your speciation, that your body physiology will return to its normal, natural functioning as it should do? And as a function of that, one of the improvements that you should see is a return to your genetically predispositioned body composition. Why would that surprise anybody? Mr. Beans and fruits and whole grains.
Athletes are trying it, and it's certainly relevant in the world of overweight, obesity.
That's relevant to everybody because it's the species-appropriate, species-specific diet, which is actually hypercarnivore, is a form of ketogenic diet. That's the correct form of ketogenic diet. The correct diet actually has nothing much to do with ketogenesis. Ketogenesis exists as part of our normal, natural, biological functioning. It's not the goal of the diet. It's one of the ramifications of the diet, and an appropriate ketogenic diet is hypercarnivore. Cool.
Diabetes, because a lot of that has to do with excessive carbohydrate intake and inability to process those carbs. So,
well, he's got that right. The cause of diabetes, did you hear that, boys and girls? The cause of diabetes is eating carbohydrates excessively. Good.
If you wipe carbs out of your diet, if you go to extremely low levels other than some above ground vegetables.
No, you don't need those either. You don't need any plant material in your diet of any kind, not a single gram of that stuff ever. You might choose to from time to time, because we're all humans and, whatever else. And we're all imperfect and these things are sent to test us. But the nutritional requirements, the ideal diet for a human being, does not contain any of that at all.
And maybe some berries. You can resolve some insulin resistance issues?
No, not insulin resistance. You've got it wrong again now. Dear, oh dear. I've covered that at length on my channels variously. People should sub to all my channels and watch all my videos, and they'll learn why I go, oh God, every time anyone says insulin resistance. No.
You will lose some weight. And so there.
Also, we need to stop talking about the loss of weight. Most people's complaint about their body is an excess or overplus of fat, specifically. Or and under-muscling, or both of those. You can lose 3 cubic feet of fat off your body and add 1 cubic foot of muscle, and you will weigh the same. Everything else held equal, like water balance and everything else. The scale would tell you that's not a win. You haven't changed your weight at all. But I'll tell you what, metabolically and health-wise and every other aspect of your life, the gaining of muscle mass and the loss of fat mass is a win. Be specific. If you're talking about fat mass, say fat. It's not a dirty word. A spade is a spade, okay? For goodness sake, you're supposed to be a professor. My opinion is we should eat grains and beans and fruit. You're done here, son, by the way. I'm going to carve you to bits. Buckle up, buttercup.
There is some basis of interest in this, especially given how many simple and unhealthy carbs people eat these days. But
all carbs exogenously consumed, this is meat, juice, nothing else, 100% squeezed from a cow, all carbohydrates are contraindicated in the diet. They are all problematic, every single one of them. There is no distinction between good carbs and bad carbs that's scientifically robust or valid. None at all. They all break down to pretty much the same thing.
Central component of our discussion, Jonathan, should be good carbs versus bad carbs.
No, it shouldn't, because there's no such thing, you fucking idiot.
Brilliant. And before we go on to that, because you mentioned this word ketosis before, can you explain a little bit more beyond just this idea that I'm not eating carbs? And
This channel up in the top corner there, it says science and nutrition. I'm not seeing a lot of science at all. I'm seeing anti-science. I'm seeing opinions. I'm seeing cocksplattery. I'm seeing fuckwittery. Yeah, not good. Not good at all.
When I'm eating fat, what is this ketosis? Like, what is going on inside my body as a result of following this diet?
If you think about this, the normal person on an average day is going to burn a combination of carbohydrates and fats.
No, they're going to oxidize them for energy. They're not going to burn them. Slightly different thing. Very important distinction.
All day long. I think everybody, at least in the US, learns this phrase: the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. That's like the basis of biology in the US.
I think my son told me he learned that this month. So there you go. I think it's universal.
I think it's universal. And it has to do with the thing called the Krebs cycle, or the TCA cycle is another name for it. And basically...
Okay, so you've lost me now. So explain.
It's a...
Yeah, but you didn't know about gluconeogenesis, son, so we're not surprised you're lost.
Cycle where carbs feed in at one end and fats feed in at the other end.
Oh, dear. No, carbs and fats feed into the Krebs cycle in exactly the same place. Wow.
And carbohydrates are usually 5 or 6 carbon atoms bound together, and fats are anywhere from 4 to 26. And you feed in, as fats break down, little 2-carb units, and you feed in, as glucose breaks down, little 3 and 4 carb units.
No. The first intermediary of the tricarboxylic acid Krebs or TCA cycle is acetyl coenzyme A, irrespective of whether that acetyl coenzyme A has been provided via the oxidation of carbohydrate or of fat. That makes no difference. What are you talking about, Professor Beans and Fruit and whole grains? No, son.
And you spit out carbon dioxide. You breathe in oxygen.
Well, you breathe it out, in fact, but okay.
And as you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out CO2. What happened? Oh, you added carbon to the oxygen you just breathed in. And in doing that, every time you break carbon,
You also make water. It's actually the hydrogen atoms that are causing the ATP production in the mitochondria. It's nothing to do with the carbon, really. The carbon is the exhaust. Dear, oh dear. Professor Numbnuts doesn't... You know nothing, Jon Snow. You don't know dick about fuck. Okay?
carbon bonds, you make energy. So glucose and fat all day long is what people burn.
No, they don't burn it. They oxidize it.
If you stop eating carbohydrate to a very low level,
In practice, usually it's around about 50 grams per day or less to induce ketosis at a measurable level on a typical drugstore ketone test kit.
then this cycle stops running.
But no, it fucking doesn't. There's only one Krebs cycle, and if it stopped running, you would die. My God. You really need to get some decent professors on your panel. And this bloke, I'm sorry. No.
And these little 2-carb units of fats that are breaking down to provide you energy that usually get burned together with carbs start to pool up, and they have an alternate path. They make...
What the fuck are you talking about? No.
ketones. They make...
Ketones is, the ketogenesis is not an alternate path. Ketogenesis is an adjunct path of shuttling energy rapidly around the body from tissue to tissue, from organ to organ, using acetyl units, stacking them up and shooting them around as ketones in the blood so that they can be absorbed from the blood by different tissues. And those acetyl units can be cleaved off the ketones, added directly to a coenzyme A, and we have acetyl coenzyme A, the first intermediary of the TCA cycle. Fuck me, this bloke doesn't even know basic biochemistry. This is amazing, kids, isn't it?
make 4 carbon units, and these 4 carbon units can be broken down to single carbs and can generate energy, but it's in a slightly different pathway that excludes the use of carbohydrate.
Does no such thing. In fact, cells absorbing carbohydrate will tend to, if those cells are in the organ which is largely involved in ketogenesis, carbs being supplied to that organ via the blood will shut down ketogenesis. You're 180 degrees out of phase with the way this thing works in terms of the positive and negative feedback loops that control our metabolic process precisely in order to maintain our homeostasis. What the purple fuck is this clown talking about? Wow.
And a lot of people probably do this actually overnight. If you haven't eaten for 6, 8, 10, 12 hours.
That's right. There'll be some ketones. Yes, it's a normal, natural part of everyday life. An adjunct energy provision pathway. Nothing alternative or emergency status or starvation-like about it. Normal part of metabolism.
Some of your carbohydrate stores are used up, and so overnight, most people probably make some ketones. Over the course of teaching nutrition, we say, really is helpful.
Wow, this guy's teaching nutrition? Did you hear that, kids? This guy, based on what you've heard so far already, do you think this bloke here should be teaching nutrition to anybody? Wow.
Healthiest to have carbs and fats burning together.
No. The Randall cycle, son. Ever heard of it? Clearly not.
There's a blood-brain barrier.
Yes.
The blood-brain barrier in the central nervous system
Yes.
don't like to burn fats. They really
It's not they don't like to.
prefer and almost exclusively can only use glucose because that's what will
Or ketones.
get into the cells. But in the absence of glucose,
There's never an absence of glucose. If there's an absence of glucose in the blood, you are dead within 4.5 minutes. Doesn't happen, ever.
if you had to, these 4 carbon units that are ketones could feed the brain.
They do, in fact. Up to about 18.5% at maximum in deepest nutritional ketosis. It's not it could be, they do.
And they could feed the central nervous system.
They do.
And so now there's this movement, oh my God, maybe it's even better. The keto folks are saying, oh God, maybe ketones are even better than glucose.
They are energetically favorable to glucose, yes. It's not maybe, it's an established fact. They are.
Feeding the brain, feeding the central nervous system.
That's exactly what they do, yes.
And that was sort of a pivot point in trying to think, could you just burn fat instead of burning carbohydrate?
And the answer is yes. You can, but the central nervous system and several other organs in your body will only function and remain viable in living with a supply of carbohydrates at a minimum basal level. So your brain central nervous system is one of those. Testes are another, for example. Ergo, in the human body, there is a metabolic pathway by which we generate sufficient glucose to subserve those needs. It's called gluconeogenesis. Ergo, the exact dietary requirement for carbohydrates in human beings is not 1 single gram ever. None at all. The glucose that we require is manufactured by the body using glycerol backbones from triacylglycerol molecules, 1 or 2 gluconeogenic amino acids, and monocarboxylates such as lactate, for example. Okay? If you're getting some sound disturbance, I apologize for that. It's pissing down with rain. Pissing down it is. Carry on.
And fat together, which is the usual recommendation.
Got it. So it's an unusual situation to be in, sort of, for our sort of normal historical diets, to be in this ketosis.
No, it is absolutely, utterly, completely normal for significant periods of time.
That is my strong opinion.
Well, then you are a fucking idiot. You are a complete waste of time. You have no idea about human physiology or human anthropology or the history of our species on this planet or basically anything else, Mr. Fruits and fucking beans and fucking whole grains. And no idea about metabolic process whatsoever. None at all. False.
Got it. So
I got it. Beans and grains and fruit and grains, that's what you should have to avoid ketosis. Ridiculous. What's next?
why have people become interested in this? You mentioned that...
Because it's a species-appropriate, species-specific diet, without any question at all whatsoever. That's why. I think I'll pause for a bit and wait for this particularly heavy rain, and then we'll carry on. Be with you soon. Right. Possibly that's better. Who knows? We'll see if it lasts. It's been raining quite a bit of late. Anyway, carry on, Mr. Professor Ridiculous.
50 years ago, they looked at this for epilepsy. That's a long time.
Not as long as 4.5 million years that we've been eating this way.
Why the discussion today? And
sure, I would just speculate that it's part.
That's all you clearly have been doing, I think, for quite some time, pal.
Part of this ongoing whiplash about low-fat diets not being the best thing for us.
Well, they're not, because that's entirely 180 degrees out of phase with our genetic gift and our organ systems and the way we've developed as a species over millions of fucking years.
So maybe it should be low carb. Maybe it should be lower carb. Oh my God, maybe it should be extremely low carb.
There's no maybe about whether it should be extremely low carb. That is an established fact. That is what is ideal for human beings. That is how we've evolved.
So I think it's just been, when you use the terms low fat and low carb, you need a qualifier to go with that. Is low lower than yesterday? Is low half as much as you had before?
This is just waffle and noise. Do you have anything of any actual value to add? Anything of any scientific veracity or correctness or utility? Mr. Christopher Ridiculous.
Is low 75 or 25% of what you had? But it's quite undefined what low carb and low fat mean. And so,
No, it isn't. Low carb is defined generally by those in the know as being less than 50 grams of total carbohydrates per day.
Jonathan, when we go to the literature and I'm trying to pool studies together and say, oh, let me summarize all the low fat, low carb studies. Oh my gosh, they are all over the place.
That is true.
And when a headline says low fat, yes, low carb, no, and the next day the other thing, you have to say, oh my God, those were not really similar levels of carbs and fats. They used completely different ones.
That is also true.
They use different sources of foods to achieve them. So it's a gray area. And I think keto has been a result of, well, could we go?
That's why if you want to get the best scientific inference for how a human being ought to eat, you need to ignore all of these so-called nutrition science because it's a ring-fenced area of ideology, pseudoscience, crack pottery, propaganda, and bastardization. You need to look at the physical anthropology, the physical morphology, the organ systems, the metabolic pathways, etc., possessed by human beings, put that together with our understanding of Darwinian evolution, there's your answer. Humans are obligate hypercarnivores, and that is how we should eat. Period. Done. Are there any anecdotes of people who have eaten only carnivore foods for a significant number of years and done well on it? Yes. Millions of us. Millions, Christopher. So it looks like it's pretty good. It looks like it pans out. I think we're done. I really do. And you're, 10 minutes into a 46-minute ramble. Let's see how it goes, though.
Go lower? Could we go lower? Could we go lower? And there's some people who are fanatical about it and some people who are appalled.
Many of them on the West Coast is, I think, definitely one of the hot spots of this, right? And so what you're saying
Racist.
is, there was this whole thing about, low fat being the way that we were all going to be healthier. The evidence turned out to be really bad for this. And so there's always been this, just to make sure I understand, it's almost a swing back, which is, well, if that case, maybe carbs are the source of all evil. Could we go down to the point there's almost none?
No, the source of all evil is failing to subscribe to all of my fine YouTube channels, all of which are listed underneath the show notes to this video, and also hitting the like button immediately. Failure to do so will result in a late night visit from Yellow Ted, and he will bring his wetsuit with the bottom cut out, and furthermore, he will bring his bucket of soapy frogs. You don't want that. Trust me.
How low? So final question on this. So if I want to be on a ketogenic diet, I want to be in ketosis, like how low carb is that? What fraction?
Around about 50 grams a day and below tends to lead people to be in a clinically measurable level of ketosis using currently available pharmaceutically drugstore sold keto kits.
Of my diet is actually coming from carbs.
So generally people start out at about 20 grams a day as a Kickstarter point and then maybe go up to 50 grams a day. Now, let me just tell you what that means with a little bit of math.
I was going to say, how many pieces of toast am I allowed with that, Christopher?
Yeah.
Oh, God, this guy is such a pretentious fuck. He really is. Just an opinion, but the fact that the bloke he's talking to, the professor he's talking to, is definitely not remotely a good source of information or credible anything is not at question. I think I've established that pretty clearly. This guy is an absolute fuckwomble.
So, I mean, most people have about 400 grams of carbs a day.
Okay.
So picture
it's
this.
Not a lot. It's not a lot of toast.
Carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram.
No, they don't. Not at all. That's false. This bloke does not know dick about fuck. Clearly.
That if you're eating 400 grams of carbs times 4 calories is 1,600 calories.
And so now he's talking about calories as being an effective, scientifically robust, or even remotely acceptable means to gauge or estimate the actual effective metabolic energy contained in a bolus of so-called food-like substance. He's wrong. The calorie is a totally inappropriate measure of that energy. And he's got it wrong as to how many of them there are per gram. Hugely wrong. Incredible.
And you're eating 3,000 calories a day, that would be 50% carb. So that wouldn't be 80 or 70 or 60. And so
yeah, we know what 50 is. We understand.
So let's say you're eating 300 grams of carbs, that would be 1,200 calories. And if you're eating 2,000 calories a day,
you can't eat calories. Calories are heat energy. You can't eat heat energy. The thing you're eating is mass. It's carbohydrates, fats, proteins, alcohol, or meat juice. Meat juice is what this is, remember?
that'd be 60%. So we're talking most people's diet is more than half carbs.
Yeah.
So to go to 20 to 50 grams means cutting back from 300 or 400 grams a day to 20 or 50 grams a day. There's not.
Wow. Thanks for spelling that out for us, because we weren't clever enough to do that math for ourselves.
Many
So
choices.
it's almost nothing. There's almost no carbohydrate whatsoever, is what you're saying.
That's right.
Is extremely extreme. I'm not even allowed a single slice of bread, I
You're
guess.
allowed to do whatever you like, son. It's not about what you're allowed to do. It's about what's indicated health-wise, what you should do or should not do. And what you should not do is consume any amount of exogenous carbohydrate to speak of.
This is what you're telling me.
Not a
Jeez.
chance. Nope.
Okay, we've already established this is not the diet for me, but that is fine. That is not the purpose of this podcast. Let's talk about your new study. So it's just been.
So here's a bloke, apparently, who professes that this is not the diet for him, having already admitted that his blood sugar control is all up the pole. Son, it is for you. It's what you need. If your blood glucose control is up the pole, you need a very, very low to zero carbohydrate diet. And you need it more than the next bloke needs it. Okay? Sorry to be the bearer of the hard facts, but that's what they are.
Been published in the top journal, American Journal of Clinical Nutrition.
Who says that's the top journal?
And we will provide links in the show notes for anybody who'd like to read that. Before we talk about the results of the study, I'd just like to take a minute to talk about the approach, because you're really famous for doing large-scale randomized control trials and have done many, and it's part of how we first got to meet. Can you just explain why these sorts of studies are so important and why they are rare in nutrition?
Sure. Yeah, so first of all, it's really hard to get people to change their diet. It's much easier to get rats to change their diet. You put them in a cage, you only put that food in there, and you're pretty sure they ate that. And if they didn't, you can see it.
Yeah, but here's the thing. If you then want to extrapolate your findings of your study to human beings, you're unable to do so because humans and rats are not the same species. Did you notice? We have different metabolic pathways. We have different organ systems designed by different evolutionary pasts. We specialize differently. That which is good for a human to eat is not, or optimal for a human to eat does not apply to a rat, and vice versa. The rat studies are worthless.
The other thing we do is we say, oh, I've got 10,000 people and I asked them what they ate. And I watch them over time to see what happened. And I can select the people who ate the lowest of this or the highest.
No, you can't, because they just told you what they ate and you believed them. They lied. People tell lies on surveys.
Of that. And those are called observational epidemiological
They're not
studies.
observational either, because observation means that you have them under control and you're watching them 24 hours a day, so you know what they did or didn't do. These are just people that you ask, so are you still eating the same way? Yep, you are. Okay, good. Believe you then. Not science.
And the challenge there is that the people who did eat the most or the least of this or that tended to also do the most or least of other things like exercise or take supplements. And it's very hard to pinpoint a causal relationship.
Impossible. You cannot inform on causality, not one iota, using an uncontrolled epidemiological, basically it's a naturalistic observation. It's not science. It has no value in cause and effect. It's a hypothesis generating sort of piece of work that leads actual scientists who are going to do actual research projects where they should be looking. Okay, it's not in and of itself an informing piece of scientific literature at all. Okay, what's next? Bloody raining again. Again.
Between diet and health outcome, if they also did lots of other things that were different. So the gold standard in theory, and I do want to provide some caveats with this, is you randomly assign them to diet A or diet B. They had to agree to participate in one or the other willingly. And so you do have people who exercise more or less. You do have people who take more or less supplements. You do have people with different weight and physical capacity.
So what you need to do is equalize your groups before you start your intervention. They have to be the same height, the same weight. They have to be the same age. Ideally, they're actually pairs of identical genetic twins, a large number of pairs of twins. Even better than that, they're separated at birth, kept in labs under observation and control with absolutely no degrees of freedom allowed to be different between them, right up to the point that you start the experiment. Otherwise, you have confounds, covariates, collinearities, things that mess with your ability to talk about cause and effect. So even the so-called control studies that are being done are actually not control studies. They are more controlled than uncontrolled. That doesn't mean they are controlled to the degree that you would need to control any subject of any experimental work of science in order to be able to remotely, reliably infer cause and effect. These kind of studies do not exist. They are impractical, impossible, financially out with anything remotely realistic. That this is always going to be an area of ideology and spin doctory. Sorry about that.
But when you're randomized, an equal number of both of those ended up in both groups. And that's actually the way we control for those confounders, is we say,
Except you usually fail. Usually there is a difference between your groups at the outset. It might not be a statistical difference, but that doesn't mean it's not a clinical or practical difference. That doesn't mean that there's no possibility that the confounder has affected the outcome, thus eroding the ability of you to talk about cause and effect of your so-called control, of your so-called dependent variable.
we balanced it. It's in both groups, so it's not different. So that's the gold standard for us.
Did you achieve it?
The challenge here, Jonathan, is when you do a randomized control trial, you really only get to pick one approach. So in our randomized control trial, which, as you said, is a great way to do a study from my perspective, good design, good to get it published, good to find out information. Let's keep in mind that our one study is that. It's one study.
Got it. So it doesn't answer all things. It answers this very specific ketogenic diet, this very specific alternative diet, and compares those two, gives you these really strong signs.
Under those circumstances that those people were doing those diets to whatever level they actually were doing those diets in the real world at that time in those particular people, there is no ability to extrapolate out beyond those people if you have failed to control absolutely from the outset, and you did fail. Okay?
Scientific results, but it doesn't tell you anything about a third diet. You're saying at this point, I have no information on that.
Yeah. So I know some of the headlines are going to appear and say, keto and Mediterranean do this and do that. And I'm just going to cringe. And I'm going to say, no, if you really wanted to define the way we did it, it would be too long a headline and no one would read it and it wouldn't be good clickbait, but that's really how it works.
Well, so the good news is this is a podcast. We got a bit longer, Christopher. So maybe just tell us about the study. What were you actually doing? And then tell us what the results were.
Yeah, I took a very specific approach to this. I think it's really been fascinating, this whiplash from low fat to low carb back and forth. And I tend to see the two compared head to head. And ketogenic is definitely a low carb diet. So you would think maybe somebody would want to compare that to a low fat diet. But my interest is actually in grades of low carb. I mean, a really fascinating thing about the yummy, tasty Mediterranean diet is it exceeded what was for a long time in the US a cutoff of 30% total fat. Don't have any more than that. If you do that, you end up with a lot of carbs. And so if the Mediterranean diet ends up being 35, 40, 45, or 50% fat, and you get 20% of calories from protein, you now have a low carb diet, but not 5 or 10% calories, 30, 35, or 40%.
Got it. So in comparison to what you're talking about, like to be ketogenic, you've got to have this incredibly low level of carbohydrates. You could still have what a normal person might think of as a relatively high fat diet, maybe compared to what they were taught when they were younger. I always talk about like my dad being told he had to go on this very low fat diet because he had high cholesterol, sort of 50 years ago. So for him, like what still seems like a radically high fat diet because it's got olive oil and nuts and whatever. But you're saying it's still radically different from the ketogenic diet that you were testing.
Yeah. And so our idea here was that we would make a Mediterranean and a ketogenic diet that were designed in such a way that they agreed on three things: lots of above ground vegetables. And I'll just clarify, the reason I'm saying that is that avoids potatoes and tubers and carrots. So the ketogenic diet focuses on broccoli and cauliflower and red bell peppers and things like that that are above ground, because the below ground vegetables tend to be starchier. And the absence of added sugar and refined grains. So those are three components that's similar. And then beyond that, the ketogenic diet says, oh my God, to get down to 20 or 50 grams of carb a day, you can't have any grains, even whole grains. You can't have any fruits other than occasional berries. That's the one allowance they give you. You can't have any beans, no chickpeas, no lentils, no pinto beans, kidney beans, things like that, which is quite odd. Because if you go to the dietary guidelines for Americans,
well, hang on. Who gives a fuck what the dietary guidelines have to say? There is no science underpinning the dietary guidelines, none at all.
The World Health Organization or the
Appeal to authority fallacy.
American Heart.
Appeal to authority fallacy.
They will say, please try to increase your whole grain intake.
Well, that's false. That is contraindicated, misanthropic disinformation. You should do no such thing.
Your fruit intake.
Same deal applies.
And your legume intake.
Same deal applies.
Legume covering the whole thing of lentils, chickpeas, peanuts, beans, things like that.
And your issue is that these high fiber foods also inevitably have carbohydrate in them, so you just can't eat them and stay within this very, very tight daily limit.
And being the microbiome lover that you are, Jonathan, and I know you are.
So if you've got a great microbiome, why is your blood sugar management up the pole? Explain that. Should we wait? We won't. It's going to be long enough already.
Recent convert to the microbiome. If we're going to feed the microbiome with fiber,
why would you do that? For what possible reason would you do that?
Main sources are going to be whole grains and beans and fruits. And yes, vegetables, but I don't think you can get all that much fiber from vegetables. So yes, all those fiber-rich sources are also high in dietary carbohydrates. So if you wanted to get to 20 to 50 grams of carbs a day, you'd have to wipe out those entire food groups, which would run counter to pretty much every public health recommendation that's out there.
So what? None of those recommendations are underpinned by science. None of them whatsoever. What's your point?
And so, Jonathan, I want to be very specific about how we framed this question. We want to design our specific diets. We're calling it the Keto Med Study, but it's really a well-formulated ketogenic diet according to Finney and Volek, reading that book. And it's also a Mediterranean plus diet if you go to lots of different Mediterranean scores, they'll tell you the things to eat the most of and the least of. And none of those scores have I ever seen avoid added sugar and refined grain. I don't think it's counter to the Mediterranean diet, but I don't see it in the scores where they try to see how Mediterranean you are. So we called it the Mediterranean Plus diet.
And I think, for our listeners who, if you're in nutrition, people talk about Mediterranean diet all the time, but I think you're outside of.
Yeah, but it's not defined. There is no one diet eaten by people that live around the Mediterranean. There are thousands of different diets eaten by people who are based around the Mediterranean. And they're markedly different between different areas and social groupings.
Of nutrition, particularly maybe if you're living in Europe somewhere, then you're a bit confused because there's a lot of countries, and I've been to Spain and I've been to France and Italy and Greece, and they seem to eat really different things. So there's a sort of concept of a Mediterranean diet, right, Christopher, which is more like a label to be applied to, I guess, a view of what is healthy. What are the core, what is a Mediterranean diet? When you describe this, because I think every nutritionist I ask would give me a different answer.
And as such, it's not a useful tool, is it?
So it's funny because I'm actually working on a write-up of this right now, and I've got a whole bunch of Mediterranean studies where it said this is what we called Mediterranean. And it's basically more vegetables, more whole grains, more beans, more fruits, fatty fish.
Okay, so everything up to when you said fatty fish, contraindicated.
Avocados.
Contraindicated.
Olive oil.
Contraindicated.
It's actually less meat.
Contraindicated, probably.
I've seen them flip-flop on dairy, actually. Greek yogurt seems very Mediterranean. Some of the scores want to do an absence of yogurt. Quite a few of them say less meat. Some of them say switch red meat for poultry and fish. Most of them say fish is Mediterranean. So those would be the major categories. Alcohol is a really odd one. Alcohol in all the Mediterranean diet scores, hopefully this will sound Mediterranean to your listeners, you get dinged for not drinking, and you get dinged for excessive drinking, and you get a point for drinking moderately.
All right. That sounds like most of my Mediterranean experiences. So that seems real. So, and I guess one of the things out of that then that that's in common is, in all those cases, you're saying not sort of the highly processed foods that are such a big part of our diet. Even with all those variations, that sounds that's sort of one of the big thing that seems.
Not all processing is bad processing. Any form of, the implication here is that any time you process food in any way, that's automatically contraindicated and a bad thing. It's not so.
Seems like that's
also the implication that processing grains makes any meaningful difference to the damaging effects of those grains is false. It doesn't. I've covered that previously on my fine science-based offerings, both here on the YouTube here and on that other platform that I'm also have a presence on as well. Look for a video by myself that describes the reason why the GI scale is worthless, anti-scientific, and not at all of utility, and does not indicate that some carbohydrate is less problematic than other forms. It's all problematic to pretty much equal degrees. What's next?
In common and very different from what most of us are eating.
Yeah, and I think if we stepped back and took it at that level, the Greeks and the Turks and the French and the Moroccans would say, well, yeah, you're right. So the question was centered around the keto diet having this complete absence as much as possible of whole grains and fruits and beans. So 3 things similar and 3 things different. And so the way the question is framed, Jonathan, is if we take people with type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes and we ask them to go on...
So you're comparing one species inappropriate in specific diet that's likely to be problematic with another one, is what your study is doing. What's the point?
These 2 diets for 12 weeks each in a crossover manner. So everybody...
12 whole weeks? Really? Do you disclaim that in your write-up and say, well, actually all we can talk about here is the effects over 12 weeks in this particular group of people at this time? Or do you say this is likely to be good long-term for people on the basis of this 12-week study.
Everybody gets to try both of them. We are assuming, since they both eliminate carbs in terms of added sugars and refined grains, that they will experience blood glucose benefits. But would there be an additional benefit by getting rid of the whole grains and the fruits and the beans? That would seem counter to health professionals' advice. So
Again, that's an appeal to authority fallacy.
we were looking to see if there was an additional benefit.
So what happened? You've been teasing us, and now we want to know. I hear quite a lot of skepticism about the ketogenic diet, so I'm assuming that it was terrible. What were the results?
No, so people lost weight on both diets.
How was that weight made up that they lost? Because if you just got their weight off a weighing scale, that's not much information of utility, is it?
We can get into some of the pros and cons, and there's some fun nuances to get into here. So the main outcome in terms of all of glucose, Jonathan, was glycosylated hemoglobin. I don't know how much your listeners will know what that term is. If you are a person with diabetes or prediabetes, you would know this is something to do with the red blood cells in your body are sort of a 90-day marker of how well you've been managing your glucose. So when you say glycosylated hemoglobin, the hemoglobin's from your red blood cell.
It's the HbA1c reading he's talking about, for those that want to know.
And it means some glucose's molecules randomly stuck on the red blood cells, and it's kind of a good hint. Then we looked at, okay, so what about other things that happen? Let's look at blood pressure, let's look at blood lipids, let's look at liver enzymes, and pretty much across the board, everybody did better in everything on both diets.
How can they be doing better on both things, on both diets? This is a comparison of one diet to another. They can't be doing better on both. You're probably talking about better as a function of how they were at baseline on their standard diet. And that's no surprise, because the standard diet is the worst possible diet a human being can consume. So you've provided no information of utility here whatsoever. What a shock.
The things that stuck out as being statistically significant.
Who gives a fuck about statistical significance? What was clinically significant? No? Does my fucking head in. The amount of stupidity extant in this world is just beyond fucking belief. This is a bloke who holds the rank of professor in academia. Can you believe this, boys and girls?
Were two.
I mean, holding the rank of professor should indicate that this bloke should be at a similar standard of competence as myself. What do you think? Leave me some comments based on everything you've heard in this video so far underneath the video. One of the biggest causes of metabolic dysfunction is failing to leave a comment under my videos. Make sure it's positive. Make sure you tell everybody how great I am and how everybody else in the world isn't. I don't really need the second part, so long as the first part's there about how great I am. Ted gets very upset if you don't do that. What's next?
One is that for the keto group, their LDL cholesterol went up.
Who gives a fuck? Who would be remotely interested in that? That has no bearing on anything whatsoever.
Well, in the Mediterranean group, it went down, and that was statistically significant.
Who gives a fuck? A, about statistical significance whatsoever, and B, about LDL cholesterol in any way, because it's not of interest clinically.
So that was a point for Mediterranean.
No, it fucking wasn't. Wrong.
In both groups, their blood triglycerides went down, but they went down even more drastically in the keto diet. And so that was actually a point for keto.
No, it wasn't. At all. No. Same deal. Triglycerides in the blood are not of clinical importance standalone.
And I think just to make sure we explain that for listeners, right? That's really surprising, because that triglycerides is just like all the fats in your blood, aren't they, Christopher? So basically you're saying you ate nothing but fat, pretty much, is what you're saying. and yet the fats in your blood went down, is rather remarkable, right?
Not really, because the oxidation of carbohydrates blocks the oxidation of fats via the Randall cycle. Remove those carbohydrates and your body is able once again to effectively burn fats and does so. Ergo, the level of fats backed up in your blood is reduced, and then you take a blood triglyceride level and it's lowered. No shock.
It is. And that's a really funny part of metabolism. If you want me to go on a quick riff for that, the idea there is that if you're eating fat, it gets processed and stored as fat. If you're eating a whole lot of carb, the idea here is that you quickly absorb and use your carbohydrate for brain energy and muscles, immediate needs. The next thing you use it for is to replete these storage depots for glucose. So some is in your liver, some is in your skeletal muscle, and it's pretty easy to fill up your stores. And after that, you turn all your carbs into fats. And so this is a bizarre concept, Jonathan, but
No, it isn't.
got it right.
It's pretty straightforward.
When you eat a high carbohydrate, low fat diet, your blood triglycerides go up. But it's not because of the fat that you were eating. That was being metabolized and put away in a more controlled fashion than the excessive simple carbohydrates that you're eating.
These are the same excessive carbohydrates, simple or not, actually, Christopher. These are the same excess carbohydrates that lame Norton claims cannot be turned into fat by the human body. Wrong again, lame Norton. Fucking idiot.
Very counterintuitive finding. You're correct.
No, it isn't counterintuitive at all. That's exactly what we would expect.
And so
Those of us that actually understand physiology.
the summary of your results, if I understand rightly, is that if you go on to this sort of healthy ketogenic diet, sort of the best one that you've designed here.
It's the one that he's designed isn't the most healthy ketogenic diet possible. It contains far too much plant material. Contraindicated fiber, contraindicated plant material. It's not good for you. The appropriate diet for a human being is carnivore, as close to 100% as is possible, feasible and deliverable for a person in their lifestyle.
Actually, the health results are really good. You say all these markers have...
Well, we've talked about two markers. LDL, which is irrelevant to anything, and triglyceride, which is irrelevant standalone.
Improved, I've lost weight. This sounds like a win, Christopher.
So it's a wash. I would say it's a wash between the two.
It's a wash because your fucking research design was of no value or utility to anybody in the real world, Christopher. You wasted the money, you wasted the time, you wasted the efforts of those people who were kind enough to agree to be subjects in your research project. You've provided no utility for anybody but yourself by virtue of producing yet another peer-reviewed publication, which you can put on your CV to bolster your own importance. But you haven't helped humanity in any way. Sorry about that.
They both worked for weight loss. You get a point for one and a point against for the other.
No, you don't. Completely wrong on both counts.
But we looked beyond that. So a couple of the key issues here are adherence and being able to maintain the diet. And another factor, given that our study periods were only 12 weeks long, is
that's right. So pointless.
What happens to other nutrient intake? What might happen over years and years of doing?
Also guessing. Crystal ball waving. Okay.
This. And what might
That's some good science, son.
happen to your microbiome? Because a
What might happen to it? Good, good. Crystal ball waving. Good.
ketogenic diet is pretty much by definition a lower fiber diet. And I actually won't have these results to share with the listeners today, but my colleagues Justin and Erica Sonnenberg right now have a freezer full of poop from our folks, and they are looking at what happened to the microbiome, and we're looking at a whole...
Over 8 weeks, 12 weeks, I should say. So, of what interest is that?
Panel
of what utility is that?
Of inflammatory markers. So tell me if we're ready to look into the nutrient intake, and even more interesting actually to start with would be the adherence if that's okay.
Yeah, let's talk about exactly that. So adherence is like science word for sort of like how sustainable this is, right? Like, is this something that I can keep doing? Like, adhere is when you tell me to do it, but for myself, it's like, can I stick with this for the long term? So, I mean, for me, that's always been the biggest concern about the ketogenic diet. As I think about friends and family members who've done this, that they've tried it for a bit, and then it becomes very hard to maintain because you go to your kid's birthday party and they're having a cake. And
so get some fucking self-discipline into your life, son. Mister, you told us at the beginning of this video that your blood glucose control is up the pole. Sort your fucking life out. Square your shit away, get some self-discipline into your life and do what you should do.
There's a lot of societal pressure to eat a cake. And I think you just explained that's already blown my...
Has anyone ever held a gun to your head and said, if you don't eat this cake, I'm going to blow your fucking brains out? Has that ever happened? No? Okay.
Day. But you've now done this real study. Like, what have you seen in terms of sustainability?
Yeah. So, and let's talk about, there's an element of the design that I didn't explain for the 12 weeks, Jonathan. And that is we decided that we wanted to kickstart everybody and get them to be as adherent or compliant, following the directions as much as they could, use whatever term you want. And for 4 of the 12 weeks on each phase, they had food delivered to them.
Which sounds great. I having said all of this, if you deliver the food to me, I'd eat almost anything. So
fuck, I really dislike this boy. Rubs me completely the wrong way immediately. That's just my personal opinion. It doesn't have to be anybody else's, but Jesus Christ. Both of these clowns annoy me in different ways, but this boy, fuck.
And then by design, we left the last 8 weeks for them to prepare food on their own so that we could see how well they were, what did it look like when they were very adherent and what did they look like in real life? And we have one additional time point, Jonathan, which is after doing the crossover and doing both diets in random order, 12 weeks later, we went back and asked them what they were eating. Because my big question was...
And you just believed them in what they told you, did you?
Okay, you definitely mastered this thing. You had 12 weeks of help from a dietitian.
Well, that's the last person that you should get dietary advice from.
You had group classes, you had individual meetings, you had more help than most people will ever get when they try this on their own. 12 weeks after the study, what did you do? So here's the fascinating thing is that on average, we had made an adherence score from 0 to 10, and 10 was perfect and 0 was lousy. We kind of assumed that when we delivered the food, everybody would be at a 9 or a 10. Both groups on average, when we were feeding them food, got a 7.5 out of 10. So
there you go. That's why one of the many reasons that your study was a complete waste of time. You have not controlled. We're done. Even if you were looking at some aspect of something that was likely to have any utility in the real world, you failed to control. We're finished. 75%. Get the fuck out of here.
So they didn't do a very good job.
No, you didn't do a very good job. You're the scientist. You are supposed to control the experiment. That is your job. Jesus H. Christ, seriously?
But they went from, a couple points before the study to 7.5 out of 10. So that kind of looked pretty good. Okay. Interestingly, more so on the keto diet than the Mediterranean diet, we had people scoring at the 2, 3, 4 level when we were delivering food. Some of them just outright rejecting the food that we delivered.
That's why your study is a failure from the ground up in terms of its design, discipline, and control. We are done. I don't think we'll bother to sit through the rest of this, boys and girls. We've seen enough from this clown to know, A, he doesn't know dick about fuck. He doesn't understand metabolic pathways at all. He doesn't understand science at all. He doesn't know how to design a research project or run one at all. And he wants to assert, based on opinion, what the best diet is for a person. Wow. Wow. Okay, so with all of that being said, that's more than enough of that for one day. And we'll enjoy some music. Don't let the door hit you in the 6 on the way out. Those of you that were late for class, you will report to Master Chief Burgess for deck swabbing and duster cleaning details. Maybe we'll actually get some of these latecomers to start cleaning the heads as well, Master Chief. I don't know. Right, in the meantime, the rest of you, you know how it goes. See you next time. Really, when someone else will be wrong on the interwebs. Let's have some music. 2, 3, 4. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do.